there was nothing. No name, no logo, no factory, only an idea, written in the quiet pages of a graduate paper. 1962, Stanford University. A 24-year-old business student, Philip Knight, writes a thesis. Its title seems simple. Can Japanese sports shoes do to German shoes what Japanese cameras did to German cameras? But in truth, it was a blueprint, a $20 billion prophecy in disguise. At that time, the global sports shoe market was dominated by giants like Adidas and Puma, European brands whose names carried prestige, but whose prices carried inefficiency. America, despite its athletic ambition, imported nearly all of its running shoes at high cost and low innovation. Knight's thesis dissected that imbalance. If Japan could make faster cameras for less, why not faster shoes? But the idea wasn't just economic, it was philosophical. It questioned the hierarchy of power between East and West, between innovation and tradition. Knight's insight threatened an entire industry model built on reputation, not performance. That sentence would become the seed of a corporate insurgency, because hidden inside it was the essence of what would become Nike's genetic code. Identify the inefficiency, attack it, and never stop moving forward. But a thesis is not a company, and an idea, no matter how bold, is only as real as the risk someone is willing to take to defend it. For Knight, that risk meant flying across the Pacific alone to prove a theory to men who had never heard his name. The journey ahead would transform a $20 billion idea into a company born out of improvisation, deception, and sheer conviction. A company that would one day call itself Nike. It was not a vacation, it was a gamble. No company, no contracts, no capital. Just a Stanford paper and a conviction that the Japanese could outpace the Germans at their own game. Knight had come to Japan to turn theory into reality. Inside this building was the future of his idea, if he could convince them to believe a lie. When the executives asked what company he represented, Knight hesitated for a moment too long, and then, with the calm confidence of a man inventing destiny, he said the words, "Blue Ribbon Sports." It did not exist, not yet. But in that instant, a corporation was born, not from paperwork or capital, but from improvisation, a fiction so convincing that it became real. The name was accidental, but poetic. Blue Ribbon, a symbol of excellence, victory, and trust. The perfect disguise for a company that had none of those things. Yet, against all probability, the deal was sealed. Knight became the American distributor for Onitsuka's Tiger running shoes. But when he returned to Oregon, there was no company to return to, only an idea that now had a deadline. He began building Blue Ribbon Sports in reverse, recruiting his former track coach Bill Bowerman, renting a small space, and selling his first shoes from the trunk of his Plymouth Valiant. In that trunk sat inventory worth barely a few $100s, but it represented something far more valuable. The first tangible evidence that a market inefficiency could be converted into a movement. Most companies are founded on confidence. Blue Ribbon was founded on uncertainty and the refusal to admit defeat. The improvised company had a name. Now it needed a purpose, and a product strong enough to make the lie permanent. Bill Bowerman was not a businessman. He was a scientist disguised as a coach, obsessive, volatile, and relentless in pursuit of speed. Where others saw limits, Bowerman saw variables: traction, weight, resistance, design. His lab was chaos. His experiments bordered on madness, but within that madness lay the future of Blue Ribbon Sports. One morning in his kitchen, he poured liquid urethane into his wife's waffle iron. a domestic experiment that would reshape global athletics. The result? A sole pattern that gripped the ground like nothing before it. Lightweight, efficient, revolutionary. This was more than design. It was engineering for victory. And for Blue Ribbon Sports, it became their first weapon in a war against complacency. Distribution was primitive. No stores, no advertising, no investors. Knight sold shoes from the trunk of his car, traveling across the Pacific Northwest to meet runners, coaches, and small retailers. Each sale was personal. Each handshake, survival. What began as an act of improvisation evolved into strategy. This wasn't disorganization, it was guerrilla distribution. By bypassing the traditional retail system, Blue Ribbon created something radically modern, a direct relationship with its audience. One was a visionary, the other, an inventor. Together, they formed a volatile symmetry. Knight obsessed with the numbers, Bowerman obsessed with performance. Their alliance was the company's heartbeat, an uneasy rhythm of intellect and invention that pushed the brand forward, step by step. Their shoes began to win races, and when runners won, the shoes became symbols. Proof that innovation could outpace money. But success came with exposure, and exposure meant danger. Because the more Blue Ribbon grew, the more its Japanese partner began to notice. For nearly a decade, Blue Ribbon Sports had lived in the shadow of its supplier. Onitsuka, the Japanese powerhouse behind Tiger shoes, had provided the product that fueled its rise. But dependence is not partnership, and in 1971, that dependence became a weapon. As Blue Ribbon's American sales soared, Onitsuka executives began holding secret meetings, courting other distributors behind Knight's back. Their goal was clear: seize control of the very company they had helped create. When the truth reached Oregon, the betrayal was absolute. Onitsuka presented Knight with an ultimatum: sell 51% of Blue Ribbon Sports, or lose your supply overnight. 51%, just enough to erase his control, just enough to turn his company into a puppet. In that moment, Blue Ribbon faced extinction. Without shoes, there was no business. Without Onitsuka, there was no product to sell. Every invoice, every contract, every future depended on a decision made in a cramped office with no air left to breathe. But in the midst of crisis, salvation arrived in the shape of rubber and nylon. Bowerman's design, the Cortez, had become the company's bestseller, and crucially, it was his design, not Onitsuka's. The Cortez became their legal lifeline, proof that Blue Ribbon owned its own innovation. Knight realized the escape route was not negotiation. It was independence. The ultimatum had backfired. In trying to seize control, Onitsuka had forced Blue Ribbon to evolve, to shed its dependency and define itself for the first time. The company's next act would be a rebirth, not just in ownership, but in identity. Blue Ribbon would die so something stronger could emerge, and in that rebirth, the world would meet a new name, a word that meant victory itself.
Blue Ribbon Sports was dead in everything but paperwork. What emerged from its remains needed not just a new name, but a new identity, one that could survive without permission, without dependence, without fear. The search for a name was desperate. Days from production, boxes were waiting to be printed. Then, at the final hour, a single word arrived from an employee's dream. Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. Short, sharp, inevitable, a name that carried both speed and defiance. With the name came the need for a symbol, a visual identity to embody motion itself. Carolyn Davidson, a college student, was paid $35 for a single design, a fluid checkmark that suggested movement, ambition, and momentum. She called it the swoosh. It would become the most valuable logo in corporate history, $35 Australian dollar sketch that would one day define a $180 billion empire. But in 1971, it was not an icon, it was armor, a shield against obscurity, a signal to the market that Blue Ribbon Sports had evolved into something new, something untouchable. Meanwhile, Bowerman's experiments continued. His Waffle trainer, born from molten rubber and obsession, became the embodiment of Nike's philosophy: innovation as a form of rebellion. Each sole, each stitch, each ounce of material spoke to a single idea, that design was not decoration, it was weaponry. Nike's rise would not depend on imitation, but invention. The brand had a name, it had a symbol, and it had a product born from genius and defiance. But the war for survival was far from over, because just as Nike began to stand on its own, the United States government delivered a blow powerful enough to destroy it overnight. After years of fighting competitors, suppliers, and their own inexperience, Nike now faced an enemy it could neither negotiate with nor outrun. The US government had delivered its verdict: a $25 million import duty bill, a sum large enough to bankrupt the company instantly. The charge wasn't criminal, it was systemic. As Nike's imports from Asia exploded, the government's trade rules caught up, and suddenly, the brand that had survived betrayal now faced annihilation by bureaucracy. $25 million in 1975 was an impossible figure. Payroll halted, production slowed, Nike's existence, the entire experiment, balanced on a single financial nif's edge. But Knight refused to fold. He understood something that few corporations ever do, that survival is a state of mind, before it is a line item. He negotiated, appealed, delayed, and borrowed. Every possible tactic was used to buy time. While others saw crisis, Knight saw leverage. The same resilience that birthed Blue Ribbon in a lie now shielded Nike in truth. The company would not die quietly, not when it had come this far. Eventually, through settlements, financing, and a surge in demand, Nike endured. The bill that should have ended them instead became their final trial, the crucible that hardened the brand into legend. For those early investors, an $8,000 stake, once dismissed as reckless, had become $1.6 million, a 20,000% return born from risk, improvisation, and audacity. From a thesis to a trunk, from betrayal to rebirth, Nike was never a story of destiny. It was a story of defiance. Every victory came from refusing to surrender. Every innovation came from crisis. Every risk was survival disguised as strategy. Nike was never simply built. It was forged,